All right, but we have lots to talk about. Let's dive in with Kolo Muani, who is, according to various reports, I think Florian Plettenberg from Sky has been the one that has been the most active on reporting this, among other things. Kolo Muani heading to PSG, reportedly. We assume he's going to be one of two players to replace Kylian Mbappe, who is still training separately from the first team. That is quite something. I'm trying to think of a German equivalent here. It would be like Bayern Munich, I guess, sending Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, and Thomas Müller to the secondary training group. I think this is quite extraordinary, and I mean, out of the context of this podcast, but it does seem like that although PSG haven't sold Kylian Mbappe and we don't know what's going to happen with Kylian Mbappe, they are quite busy planning a future without him. And Gonzalo Ramos, by all accounts, seems to be done. A very prolific striker from Benfica that actually you and I have written quite a bit about for Transfermarkt, right? And now Kolo Muani seems to be next. I think, honestly, it looks like that the way they're structuring this, by bringing in two different players, you can't replace Mbappe like for like. Kolo Muani, I don't think, is a like for like replacement. Even though he's quite tall, I don't think he's a typical number 9. That role falls more to Ramos, right? He does come more from the wing. He's very fast. He's very quick. I really like his off the ball runs as well. He's someone who provides a lot of assists. In fact, when he first came into the Bundesliga, he seemed more like an assist king rather than a striker. But this is by no means a one-for-one replacement for Kylian Mbappe, Stefan.
No, it's not. I completely agree with you. I think PSG are being quite smart in the sense that they're, the many hands make light work, I guess is the old expression. And trying to find a like-for-like replacement for Mbappe would be impossible. Kolo Muani does kind of fit a lot of the profiles that Mbappe kind of embodies at PSG. He is a Parisian of birth. He grew up in the city. He's obviously a French international, so he's already a bit of a kind of national star there in France. Maybe for all the wrong reasons recently, but of course he's still got a lot of goodwill. He's still a young enough player and promising player to kind of go on and be a really big player for the French national team going forward. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. I actually also maybe wonder if PSG are looking at Kolo Muani and thinking, well, yeah, he could play up front technically, even though he's not a kind of classic number 9, but he can kind of do what he's been doing for Frankfurt, where I guess it would be a bit like Mbappe in the sense that even though he's tasked with playing as a number 9, he likes to drift out wide, he likes to kind of fill into the channels, and he likes to kind of offer passes as much as goals. Maybe Mbappe in recent years has kind of taken on a more goal-scoring role because of just his sheer presence and his profile and the fact that he's on the pitch to score goals. I wouldn't expect Kolo Muani to immediately change overnight, but I think maybe what's also interesting about Kolo Muani, and then if you add Dembele, who they've also expected to sign from Barcelona, into the fixture here, then you've near enough got a front 3 there where Kolo Muani can play off the left, Dembele can play off the right, and Ramos can play through the middle. And I think that's important because not only is there reports that Mbappe could be moving on, but there's also reports that Neymar might be looking to move on as well this summer. We did a video on YouTube about it, on the Transfermarkt YouTube channel not so long ago actually, looking at why he should or shouldn't move on now that Messi and potentially Mbappe have moved on. But anyway, this is a Bundesliga podcast, so I'll get back to Frankfurt. I just kind of think it's important to kind of contextualize all that because I think Frankfurt are probably sitting thinking, well, not only would they maybe want Kolo Muani to replace Mbappe or to compensate for Mbappe's departure, but they might also need him if Neymar decides to move on as well, because Kolo Muani can play both those roles. So, I think he's a player in huge demand. He was linked with Man United. He's been linked with Bayern Munich. We don't know if the latter might come back in for him if the Harry Kane thing falls through. I personally don't think he'd be a good fit at Bayern, but, that's never stopped a club from spending needless amounts of money on a player because some guy in a podcast said it's a bad idea. So I don't know. I must admit, over the course of the summer, I have kind of gone back and forth on whether Frankfurt should, sell Kolo Muani. You look at his stats, you look at his numbers last season, and there's just no doubt that team would probably fall apart without him. But at the same time, I do kind of wonder if, it's that kind of idea of striking while the iron's hot, isn't it? And I do kind of, we've seen Frankfurt over the course of the last kind of 5 or 10 years, they do have players who do kind of come up out of nowhere and suddenly become star players. You did an excellent kind of newsletter last week on Sebastian Haller on this topic, actually, and you mentioned, his success previously in the Bundesliga and how not only did he just spark into life, but he also brought players like Rebic into attack as well. Can't remember who the third player was. I completely lost my mind there.
Jovic. And you just look at that. Both of them, they haven't done anything since, right?
Well, exactly. And I wonder if that Frankfurt board are thinking, well, do we have another Sebastian Haller on our hands here? Which, not to say he's a bad player by any means, but it does mean, his stock could dramatically change very quickly. And if Kolo Muani doesn't score another 30 goals and assists next season, he's going to be worth half what he's worth right now. And that might seem a little alarmist, but I actually think that's the kind of fickle business that football is these days. And as soon as you're out of the limelight and all of a sudden people are thinking, oh, hold on a minute, he's actually 25 or he's 24. He's no longer got that kind of nice, polished gleam about him because people still think of him as a young player. Things can change very quickly. And, I must admit, I do you look at that Frankfurt squad, and although on paper, in terms of stats, there was no one to kind of step in for Kolo Muani, you look at the players that they do have in attack, and there's room to work with there. They've also got, I think Lindstrom's perhaps the most obvious one, but Mario Götze has kind of grown into a kind of senior role. They've also picked up now from Dortmund on a full-time contract, and they do technically still have 2 or 3 strikers, and Rafael Bora, Marmoush, Lucas Alario. I know not all these players aren't going to be sticking around this summer, but there are options there. And of course, if they do kind of get to cash in on Kolo Muani, then they could probably pick up about 4 or 5 new attacking players relatively easily. So I'm not so sure. I think if I'm Frankfurt, I'm probably thinking the most amount of money they could ever get for Kolo Muani is probably what they would get this summer. And maybe, if you look at it that way, maybe now is the best time to sell him.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. That's always the risk when you have a player like Kolo Muani who's in a very hot stock. All you need is like a season where he doesn't work out quite as well, and then that stock drops significantly. And it is. You saw that with their previous players that they quote unquote developed and then sold on. Whether it was Luka Jovic or whether it was Ante Rebic, for example, right? Haller, of course, went on, and the brief moment at West Ham aside, where I think he just wasn't the right fit, or actually, I think they thought that he was something different than he actually is. He was very prolific at Ajax, and then of course once he did recover from cancer last year, his numbers were quite impressive as well. So this is a player that did make players around him better, and has a track record since leaving Frankfurt that he can still do it. But I think I can see with Frankfurt why they would be worried. That might not be the case at Kolo Muani. Yes, there's the assist numbers, which are very high, and that gives you some indication that he is a very important player. But can he replicate this season after season? And I think that is where they may be a little bit worried about. And you look at the players that they've been linked with already, eternally with Hugo Ekitike, who I swear to God one day is going to end up in the Bundesliga, because that's just the way, young French talent. That's just how it works, right? But there's a couple other players that they've been linked with. Gift Orban, it's the young Nigerian striker who has made a name for him at Genk. At Ghent, not Genk, sorry. There's Ili Wahi, who I wrote about for Transfermarkt. Surprise, surprise, another French striker, right? And then, of course, there's a certain Joshua Zirkzee, who they have always seemed to be linked internally to. But, there's lots of players out there, I think, that they can just fit into the system and essentially do this again. And you have to remember too, I think for Frankfurt, big thing is that they will be playing internationally this year, but they're not playing in the Champions League. They're playing in the first, or is it the third qualification round, playoffs or whatever it is. Whatever comes before the group stage of the Conference League, they're in that, and I think that's actually already next in a couple of weeks, end of the month, right? So they'll probably be playing internationally, but it's not like in previous years where they played Europa League or Champions League, where it was very demanding for them. And so I think they have a moment now where they can just cash in on a player, get those 100 million euros or whatever it will be in the end, and I'm probably including bonuses, right? And just say, okay, like, let's take that money, bring in a couple young guys and do this again and raise the ceiling of the team and see that we can get back into European football again next year and sort of continue this momentum where every year this club is on a better financial footing and has closed the gap to the rest of the top teams, because that's where they want to be ultimately, right? Frankfurt wants to be back in that top echelon of German football. They're doing it organically, which is very difficult. And I think if you are them and someone like PSG comes for, as you said, a 25-year-old striker, you probably got to take the money.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only other thing to maybe add to this is that, Frankfurt also have a new head coach in Dino Topmöller this season. And, not only is he a relative unknown quantity and quality, I guess, as a head coach in the Bundesliga, but, we see this so many times where, especially in the Bundesliga, where a new head coach comes in, they want to kind of impose themselves, they want to start this kind of new tenure at the club, but there's a big kind of transfer looming on the horizon and it kind of undermines everything. And the kind of parallel that it draws with me is obviously Robert Lewandowski's situation at Bayern when Julian Nagelsmann joined the club, and there was always this back and forth as to what was going to happen. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that kind of transfer saga ultimately sowed the seeds of Nagelsmann's demise at Bayern, where there was so much going back and forth over Lewandowski and how to replace him, and the players who could or couldn't replace him, and then obviously the fact that the squad just did not work last season due to that. And I'm not saying Frankfurt obviously have the same expectations or the same media presence or the same kind of FC Hollywood potential as Bayern do when things don't go right, but I think if you're Topmöller, you're probably saying to the board or the chairman and your sporting director, look, I need to know if this guy's staying or not. Sell him now, by all means, make the money, sign me 2 or 3 new strikers or forwards, or bring me in that left back that I desperately need, etc., etc. But do it quickly and do it now, because I don't want another season of this guy winking at PSG or Man United or Bayern Munich. I want to try and build a squad of people who want to be here. And actually, you could probably argue that was a large case of what went wrong at Frankfurt last season, when you had guys like Daichi Kamada constantly kind of looking over their shoulder as to what offers they could get. Still waiting to see what happens to him.
Very signed to Lazio.
Oh, is it gone? Is it done? Okay, well, there we go. That
Yeah.
just goes to show how much I paid attention this weekend. But yeah, so that's just one. But he's nowhere near the same side of profile as Kolo Muani would be. So yeah, I think it's something that the club are going to have to maybe draw a line under at some point. And if PSG come in with a decent offer, maybe it's worth selling.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to wait and see what happens here, but I think the trend goes towards Kolo Muani leaving the Bundesliga, which is a shame. But and again, Frankfurt paid $0 for Kolo Muani to sign it from Nantes, so that's a nice little transfer profit here. Speaking of nice little transfer profits, Stefan, Mickey van de Ven.